Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. It is great to be here today. And today, as my guest, I have Ring. Hello, Ring.
Yep. Hi. It's good to be here.
How are you doing today?
Um, been better, been worse.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Health issues?
Um, no more than usual.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, today we're here to discuss media literacy.
Yep.
And I know that is one of your favorite topics. So I'm going to let you go ahead and get right to us and tell us what it is that you think that people need to know about media literacy.
Okay. So, first, I'm going to say that when I talk about media literacy, I'm talking about the critical reception of media, and when I'm talking about media, I'm not talking about the news.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Are you thinking more social media or just all media in general?
like so movies, TV
Mm,
shows, books,
mm-hmm.
everything, like everything that conveys information is media. And Americans tend to be terrible at media literacy. um, but that now um now you can either confirm or deny it, because I only really went to public school after No Child Left Behind, because in I was a 90s kid, and throughout most of the 90s I went to a church school.
Mm-hmm.
And I only like I said, I only went to public school after No Child Left Behind. So I can't say if this is an America in general thing, or if it's an America post Bush thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But America doesn't like, doesn't like teaching things that can't be put on a standardized test. And you can't put, like, even though the natural progression of learning, of covering the subject of English is going from learning to read to learning how to process the information you're reading. Um, like, uh, it's basically the English tests, at least through, high school. And once again, I have to put the caveat is of I'm not sure that if this is an in general thing or if this is just a post, No Child Left Behind thing. But, you know, you basically the English tests are rather, are more, did you read the book? And
Mm.
what did you get from the, not what did you
No,
get from the book.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Before we go any further, I've got a minor tech issue here, and I had this same tech issue last week. Um, my little view thing is showing that nobody is watching the show.
Yeah.
And I know that's not true because I can go to another tab and I can see there are 7 watching the show.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know why it's doing that, but I know that when it did that, I just ignored it last time. And the show I did with Art and Madam Who, afterward, people were being able to find it. The count was off on for Google. Do you have any idea why it's doing that or how to fix it?
um no, is honestly because, like, the StreamYard's count thing, I've never managed to get it to notice, like, I think it's a YouTube talking with StreamYard's issue.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
unfortunate because yeah, my numbers were way off on my last stream, and this one is showing that nobody's watching. And like I said, I know that's not true.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like, I can see the people in the chat.
right. But the problem with that is that I don't think that YouTube is sending out the message that we are live, and I think a lot of people are missing the show because they don't realize we're live. So,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to see if I can find someone that can help me fix that. Sorry for
Yeah.
interrupting.
Oh no, and I think I have that like I said, I think it's a YouTube talking with StreamYards thing because I have that problem too.
Mhm.
Like a lot of people, like a lot of times I don't really get people in the in the chat until like we've been going for like a half hour or so.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Limited Light says that he received the notification. Okay,
Yeah.
and Mage Grey Wolf says he got a notification 2 minutes ago. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So at least I know the notification went
Yeah.
out. Okay, that feels better.
Yeah. Okay. So but anyways, so back and media literacy isn't really something you can put on you can put on a standardized test because and one of the fun things about you know uh critical reception in media is that there are no real right answers, you know and that that's why you can't test for media literacy.
Mhm.
Now, which is a shame that America and fundagelicals in particular. Um, for those of you who aren't aware, fundagelical is a portmanteau that I use of fundamentalist and evangelical.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, but um, but so sorry, brain. Um, media literacy is important because one, when you're engaging with media critically, you're less susceptible to propaganda. You're
Mm.
easier.
Mhm.
It's when you have the skill set to engage with media on a critical level, it's easier to recognize what's being brought to you as propaganda
Right.
rather
Right.
than what
And
it
e and
sorry.
even when you get a story that is true,
Yeah.
like a news report or whatever, critical thinking and using those critical thinking skills while listening to the report allows you to pick out things that are factually incorrect,
Yeah.
even within the true story. I know that one thing that I picked out, one thing that really sticks out to me was, and you're too young to remember this. It happened before you were born,
Yeah.
but there was a little girl that was 18 months old that fell down a well. She fell
Yeah.
into a pipe that went down to a well, and it was so narrow, they trying to get her out was a major issue, and she was stuck down that well for, gosh, probably 18 hours before they finally got her out. They had to
Yeah.
basically drill a new hole down to where she was, and then pull her out through the new hole. And one of the things that people were saying was, well, she's starting to get dehydrated, can't they just put a bottle down to her? And the reporter was saying, well, they can't bring a bottle down to her because they don't want her stomach to expand even 1 inch from the extra space that the water would take up in her stomach. And I read a doctor's report that was,
Yeah.
no, that was not why they wouldn't give her a bottle. They wouldn't give her a bottle because she might have internal injuries from the fall, and giving her a bottle of milk or even water could exasperate those injuries. And I said, that makes a lot more sense than what the
Yeah.
reporter said.
Yeah. But so for example, um, uh, so there's Frank Miller wrote this graphic novel in the 90s called 300,
Mhm.
about the Battle of Thermopylae. Now, Frank Miller's graphic novel is a dark satire Spartan culture.
Mm-hmm.
He goes out of his way to, put the blame for the war on Sparta. Like the Spartans are depicted as practically half naked savages.
Mm-hmm.
And like even you know when they're sitting around the story sharing while they're sitting around the campfire sharing stories, it's depicted as if the Spartans are boys listening to their favorite bedtime story almost. Now when Zack Snyder adapted 300 into the film,
Mm-hmm.
he he was very, very accurate to keep the aesthetics, like if you look at the film, it's almost as if the graphic novel was brought into live action and you know straight from the comic. But he also made slight little changes where instead of being a satirization of the fascist monarchy that was Sparta, it turns it into fascist propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now Johnny Repine.
Yeah, I was holding that comment until you were finished with your thought because I wanted to
Yeah.
discuss that and not just put it on the screen.
Oh
America.
no, a more recent one.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll get to that
Yeah.
one in a minute. But America teaches to standardize tests. Americans at large don't retain more than a bumper sticker or song chorus level of memory. Thus, the distrust over science always changing. I do agree that America teaches to standardize tests, but I
Yeah.
don't agree that we are any worse at memory than anyone else.
Yeah. Like in terms of especially when it comes to fundagelicals, it's more a term of holding, it's more a condition of holding on to dogma and just not, well, when it comes to fundagelicals, they either under critique, they either take what they're reading at face value.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, they're the most important book that they revere, the Bible. Or if they want to, like, especially if they want to prove that something is bad or demonic, they'll over scrutinize it and nitpick everything that could be shown as a sign that it's evil, and until their analysis of the piece looks like one of those conspiracy theory boards with all the yarn and the pictures and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um but on the anyways on in regards to Johnny Repine's comments on satires lost on Americans at large, um actually Starship Troopers is basically the reverse of the 300 example, because if you read Heinlein, like, don't get me wrong, Heinlein is a great pulp author. He does pulp action very great. He does sci-fi settings very great. But he also does like to put a lot of fashy, questionable stuff in his books.
Mm-hmm.
I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Heinlein, and when the director for Starship Troopers adapted it, he made it a satire of itself.
He was my favorite author when I was about 14 or 15, but I haven't read anything by him since I was about 20. I'm
Yeah,
not sure if I don't even remember which books he wrote.
like Heinlein is one of the few authors that I will suggest not reading critically because it might ruin your enjoyment of it.
Interesting.
I mean, well enough that, you know, I mean, because I don't think you're, gonna fall for the, fascist theming and what that, Heinlein likes to put into his work. So, like, as like when it comes to Heinlein, it's probably just best to like turn off that section of your brain and just enjoy the pulp. Yeah.
One thing that I had heard about education decades ago
Yeah.
was, back when American education really was a superior education, was that one of the things that made it a superior education was that most other countries were teaching students to memorize things and to regurgitate what they memorized, whereas
Yeah.
Americans were being taught to think critically and they were being taught how to think rather than what to think.
Yeah.
And I think that's changing with
Yeah.
the stress on passing standardized tests. We've almost come to the Dolores Umbridge
Yeah.
philosophy of education is about passing exams.
Yeah. And figure that, I can't be on a stream without the channel punching bag coming up. um Basically it's kind of a running joke on my channel that J.K. Rowling is a bit of the channel punching bag. Because she, mostly because she's a massive turf, but also now I say this as someone whose spouse is a massive Potterhead, who separates the art from the artist, and also as someone who, like, had I not grown up fundagelical in the 90s, I probably would also be a massive Potterhead. Like I acknowledge that probably the only reason I'm not that into Harry Potter is because when I actually read the books, I was outside the age range that it's aimed for. I was going somewhere with this.
I have a daughter that is exactly the age range it was aimed
Yeah.
at. I mean, she was always the exact same age as Harry every year that a new book came out. And the funniest part was when the last book came out, she went to the bookstore and waited outside at midnight for the book to go on sale, bought a copy, came home, and by 4 in the morning she had finished it.
Yeah. But anyways, I forgot where that was.
Oh, I was hoping that would help
Yeah.
you bring back. All right, well, let's move on to something else.
Yeah.
Johnny says the movie's satirizing of Starship Troopers led audiences taking away not much more than war is good and military service should be required to vote.
Which is ironically the message of like the what Heinlein is trying to tell you in Starship in Starship Troopers is that, like, we should be in a society where where the only path to true citizenship is through the military. And ironically, we're already kind of in a system like that.
Yeah.
But
What, were you reading the comment?
yeah,
Oh, it wasn't anything to
yeah,
what you were saying. Otherwise, I would have
yeah,
held it until you were finished. I'll hold comments to your finished
yeah,
on things that we should discuss. But anything that's just
yeah,
general for people to see, I'll put up on the screen while you're talking.
yeah. Um, yeah. Okay, but so one, when you're uh, media literacy helps you recognize, what's when you're being propagandized at, which
Mm-hmm.
makes you more resistant to propaganda. Two, if you're media literate, it's it's more difficult to censor, media when you have a bunch of media literate people.
Now, do you think that the skepticism that one should bring to media differs with the general media like movies and books and so
Yeah.
forth, and social media? Because social media creates a completely different kind of danger than other media. The danger of social media isn't what is coming at you. It isn't your ability to critically think through what you are being told, but rather messages that are coming to you in a much more subtle fashion.
Um, can you elaborate?
Well, for example, the concern about TikTok manipulating our elections.
Yeah.
People are posting things on TikTok, and we just watch this for entertainment to see our
Yeah.
friends and so forth. And I don't see where the media manipulation is, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that I may have seen it and not recognized
Yeah.
it, or I'm not sure.
Now, the influence of social media is kind of difficult to gauge
Hmm.
because especially with the way social media is monetized, it's very easy to make echo chambers around yourself.
Okay.
Because social media algorithms show you what you want to see.
Hmm.
So it's like it's hard to see what impact social media is having on the populace in at large without doing a proper study.
Hmm. Hmm.
Without actually going into the data and crunching the numbers. And this is a little more of the analyst ring side of things than um and
Purple says, I think TikTok is more about them harvesting personal data, which can be used to target
yeah,
advertising, including political ads.
yeah,
Yes, and I've definitely seen that on Facebook and other places. What one thing, particularly that I saw, I was looking for a housekeeper, and
yeah,
I did some Google searches to find a housekeeper. And the next time I turned on Facebook, it was suggesting housekeepers to me.
yeah,
And why does Facebook know that I did this Google search?
yeah. And um uh the last well, a lot of it actually ties into censorship, but censorship could very much be its own topic. um but another uh thing that is, I wouldn't say important but helpful
Mhm, mhm.
about being media literate is like when you look, it gives you a deeper appreciation for the media that you're consuming. Um,
Okay, Spaghettius has the ultimate question, and the one that I knew we were going to get to at some point. So
Yeah.
let's go ahead and get to it now. So, what can we do to be better at media literacy?
Okay.
How do we develop the skills of critically analyzing the media that we are consuming?
Yeah. So, um, roughly, there are three things that you kind of have to keep in mind when you're engaging with your media. And I was actually planning on talking about this. So, um, is one, media media does not exist in a vacuum. The culture influences the media, and the media influences the culture in something of a vicious cycle. Like, for instance, you can't really talk about Sam Raimi's Spider-Man without 9/11 coming up, because of how cathartic the bridge scene, you know, was for the post, for an America that was still reeling from 9/11. Or, for example, when you're watching a lot of early DreamWorks movies, talking Prince of Egypt, Road to El Dorado, Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, pretty much everything up to Shrek.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to keep in mind that DreamWorks started by splitting off from Disney. Like,
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of executives and creatives from Disney said, you know, basically, in the height of the Disney Renaissance, we don't like how you're running this. We're going to go off and start our own studio.
Right.
And when you keep that in mind, with the exception of the Prince of Egypt, because that was basically tailor made to be an Oscar bait Disney killer in the style of Disney, there's a lot of subtle anti-Disney, or Disney subversions, in the Road to El Dorado. Like, the Road to El Dorado is basically a subtle satire of Disney when you really look at it, because the protagonists are basically the opposite of what you'd expect of a Disney protagonist. Chell is more in charge of the situation than just about anyone else, which is like kind of the opposite even amongst the Disney Renaissance princesses. And it's less about once they get to El Dorado, it's less about the heroic journey. It's more about the you know the con men trying to get what they want. Meanwhile, you've got the chief and the high priest trying to use the con men for their own ends, and it's this big, almost Games of Thrones intrigue game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and and then, of course, you have Shrek, which was just Katzenberger's big double middle finger, blatant satire of everything Disney and Eisner. um so first thing, media doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
The exception to that rule is death of the author is still a valid lens of reception. Like, for instance, one could, just from reading the Harry Potter books,
Mm-hmm.
one could, get the message of a boy who was literally kept in a closet and abused for what he was, and is welcomed into a magical world of people like him who respect and celebrate him for who he is, and then goes to overthrow an oppressive regime that tries to enforce an order that is dictated by what, how a person happens to be born. So like, just looking at the Harry Potter books themselves, you could get a very queer positive reading of it. But then, once you take into like, and that's a valid reading, but then of course these were written by the Turf Queen.
But nobody knew she was that until long after the books came out. And, I also have to kind of wonder if maybe she changed her position. You're definitely not old enough to remember George, or was his first name George? But anyway, Wallace, when he ran for president. Now, I was a toddler back then. But his most famous thing was segregation today, segregation yesterday, segregation forever. And he ran as a staunch segregationist. But if you look at his political history, he actually was a champion of Black rights in the early 50s. And so when he started running for president at the beginning of his campaign, the Black voters, particularly Black voters here in Alabama, were behind him because they knew him to be a champion of Black rights. And so then when he came out as a segregationist, they were just bowled over. What happened? Well, what happened was that his PR people fed him the figures that said, you can win as a racist, but you can't win as a champion of civil rights. So what he actually believed, I have no idea, but he completely changed from being a champion of civil rights to being a racist.
And that being said, there's also a lot in Harry Potter about maintaining the status quo. And also it is kind of yikesy that a lot of bad stuff, a lot of the plot, especially in Chamber of Secrets, and a lot of the plot is hinges on Ron and Harry sneaking into a girl's bathroom. So like, but that's the thing about critical reception of media is you can like, every answer is right, but you have to back up with, your answer with either, information connected to the text or information from the text itself. But so first, media doesn't exist in a vacuum. We were actually still on that. Secondly, everything in a piece of media is there for a reason, but the reason isn't always significant. For example, from comic books, both Doctor Strange and Spider-Man do the same hand signal. Because Spider-Man does this when he's shooting his webs, and when Doctor Strange is casting his magic, he does same hand symbol, different
position.
Now, someone noticing this could spin some grand conspiracy theory about how, Marvel Comics is making Spider-Man secretly satanic to brainwash the kiddies to be Satanists. Well, the reason behind that is because both Doctor Strange and Spider-Man were originally drawn by Steve Ditko. And Steve Ditko was really good at drawing hands, and he liked to flex on other artists but because hands are difficult to draw, so he liked to draw like hands in dramatic gestures, as like, hey, look at how good I am at drawing hands.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and so it was basically just Steve Ditko flexing his art skills.
Purple Rhymes with Orange says, I think JK did fall prey to propaganda and got sucked into a
Yeah.
movement. Yeah. I would not disagree with that. You know, that could, but Spaghettius disagrees and says, I think that's a rather charitable reading.
Yeah.
Um, and Spaghettius has a very good point here. Still, shouldn't she, as an author, have at least some media literacy?
Yeah.
And that is, you're absolutely right, Spaghettius. That she, as someone who uses media for a living, should have more media literacy than
Yeah.
that. She should have been able to figure out that she was coming in on the wrong side there.
Yeah. So, first tip is media doesn't exist in a vacuum. Second is everything has a reason. The reason isn't always significant. And third, the most important question to ask isn't what, but why. Now, for for example, I'm going to bring up a piece of media, a piece of literature that as apostates we are all too familiar with, the Bible. So, as I've pointed out in your comics comment section, and in the chats quite a few times, in the Gospels, Pontius Pilate is portrayed in a diametrically opposed way to how we know he really was from correspondence that we have from Rome. Like, Roman sources, paint Pontius Pilate as a tyrannical monster. I think we actually have a letter, addressed to Pilate saying, hey, cool it. Judea is already a powder keg. We don't need you lighting matches by crucifying everyone. Now, as atheist counter apologists, or as atheist activists, we might take that fact that the Gospels kind of portray Pontius Pilate as a bit of a weenie, and say, look, the Gospels are a historical, checkmate. But the more important question would be, why do the Gospels portray Pilate as unwilling to crucify Jesus, when in all reality he would have been handing out crucifixions like they were audience prizes at an Oprah show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, this is coming as a 21st century reader who doesn't have the background in Aramaic or Greek, or so big asterisks that this is just me as a layperson, and I am far as far from an academic or a theologian that you can get, aside from the fact that I grew up steeped in in the Bible, but that was under a fundagelical interpretation, and like I said, fundagelicals aren't good at media literacy.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see like three possible reasons why the Gospels would portray Pilate in such a way. One would be to emphasize how sinless Jesus is. How sinless their depiction of Jesus is.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, would be to create a theological basis for anti-Semitism by removing the onus of executing Jesus from Rome and putting it onto, the Jews.
I think that's a very much a denominational thing.
Yeah. Well,
And I say that because, I first heard that from my brother when I was in my 20s, and I didn't ask him what he meant, and I really should have, because I had no clue what he was talking about. That he just made a comment that I should be anti-Jewish, and I was really confused by that comment because there was nothing in my religion that was anti-Jewish.
yeah,
In fact, that what was preached to us, that Jesus himself was Jewish.
yeah,
There's no reason for us to be upset with the Jewish, and the Jews were God's chosen people, and
yeah,
Jesus came along to fulfill the law, not to make us hate the Jews. So
yeah.
I think that, the anti-Semitism that you see in some Christian sects is limited to certain Christian sects.
Well, and there's the third option, which is someone call him A, someone call him B.
Hmm.
Um, and like for instance, when you look at the Gospel of John, it's probably a little more a column B because John, while the other Gospels are talking about the scribes and the Pharisees, John's always ranting about the Jews. Like he uses the phrase "the Jews" almost always negatively. But like but to really say which is which is which is the reason, you'd have to like look at when they were actually written, which is kind of up in the air because or when they were actually written, where they were actually written.
Yeah, that's true.
Who the intended audience of each gospel was.
Yeah. And that's one of the, even the believers claim that that is what you have to do in order to really, really analyze it. What I
Yeah,
find absolutely baffling, though, is that even though the average layperson in the church pew is
yeah,
not very media literate, the church leaders are extremely media literate. They are very good at reading what's going on and how to use it to their advantage.
yeah,
And, the big example, of course, is the whole abortion thing. Protestants didn't have a problem with abortion until 1980.
yeah,
When Roe versus Wade first came out, the Catholics were against it, but the Protestants really didn't care.
yeah,
Um, and It wasn't until the campaign of Ronald Reagan, when they needed some kind of an issue to unite believers into his base, that they went for abortion, and they chose Jerry Falwell as their leader. And
yeah,
yeah, they manipulated the heck out of the media to convince people that abortion was this great moral wrong, and they were so good at it that they still, here 2 generations later, have still got them convinced. And people that are your age
yeah,
don't even remember what it was like when that was not a Protestant issue.
yeah. Or another example is there was basically a mini satanic, I say mini satanic panic, but really the satanic panic never really ended. But a mini satanic panic about Disney during the latter half of the Disney Renaissance, where like you know where the Southern Baptist Convention and like Focus on the Family were outright saying, "Hey, if you're a Christian, boycott Disney."
Mhm.
And
Noodle has a really good point here.
yeah,
Hammer, meat, nailhead. They're very media literate and are preying on people who aren't. Yeah,
yeah,
she's absolutely right. That's exactly what's going on.
and Well, since Noodle made it into the chat, I'm going to use one of my favorite examples of how while while every answer to a piece, every response to a piece of media may be valid, some can be more valid than others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Noodle knows where I'm going with this. So a couple of months back in January, we covered the Disney Renaissance as a period of progression of animation. Looking at it as kind of a whole, taking a film from the early Renaissance, taking a film from the mid Renaissance, and taking a film from the late Renaissance, and just seeing how cinematic animation progressed during that time. Well, for our late Renaissance piece, we picked Hercules. Now, there's a scene at the end where Hercules dives into the river Styx to save Meg, and in venturing into the realm of the dead and sacrificing himself, he eventually achieves, he succeeds in his goal of attaining godhood. And when I looked at it, I was like, this is very, this can be seen as very Christ-like,
Mm-hmm.
Sacrificing himself to venture into the depths of Hades to, rescue a lost soul,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and thus attaining deity.
Mm-hmm.
So Focus on the Family, in their review, called that scene out specifically and declared it spiritually unhinged.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I actually have a book called Finding God in Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
You know that book?
No.
Oh.
But I do know that Tolkien is like, there's probably like a 2 on the Richter scale earthquake going on in Oxford right now because of Tolkien just spinning in his grave.
Over what issue?
So Tolkien Tolkien was famously vocal in how much he despised allegory as a literary style.
Okay, I was not aware of that.
Yeah. In fact, it's a pet theory of mine that Tolkien didn't hate allegory despite his friendship with C.S. Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
He hated allegory because he was friends with C.S. Lewis.
Okay. Okay.
So, like, when everyone, when a lot of people say that, there's an allegory for X in Lord of the Rings, like, yeah, Tolkien, well, like, while Tolkien, didn't purposefully go out to write allegory,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
he still kind of wore his biases on his sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why there's some kind of questionable themes in Lord of the Rings and the Legendarium at large when it comes to race, is because, he's an upper class, academic from the mid 20th century who kind of wore his biases on his sleeves in his writing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's actually like, so you remember, like last year, Amazon was coming out with Rings of Power, and there was this whole big kerfuffle amongst the right because of the diverse casting. Now, I was cautious about the diverse casting, but not because I'm a racist. It's because the Lord of the Rings, written by a 20th century upper class white academic who wore his biases on his sleeves, whether consciously or subconsciously, you can't really say. There are a lot of themes that would be very easy to accidentally play into racist talking points if you weren't careful with the casting.
Yeah.
And like, and I haven't had a chance to say it on a stream because it kind of came to me after me and Noodle and Scummer were done talking about Sandman. But I think like a lot of the racial issues that Noodle had, and of course, Noodle's mixed race, so they're more able to spot when there are bad racial tropes in media, because they have the lived experience to pick that out, which I don't. And that's another good part of media literacy, is being aware of your own biases and blind spots. But as I thought over it, I think a lot of the issues in the Sandman are racially speaking, are failures of colorblind casting. Because when you look at the graphic novel, which was, or the comic series, which was written in the 80s, it was written, everybody was white, basically. Comic 1980s, unless you're touching on social issues, all your characters are going to be white. White's the de facto color. And then, when Neil Gaiman went to, Netflix went to bring that to the screen, Neil Gaiman went for a more diverse cast. And I think, he went for, colorblind casting, like just picking who was best for the role. And ended up getting like basically a lot of like the magical black servant trope by accident. And so so basically, since we're kind of into this, my kind of stance on colorblind casting is, or diverse casting, or race or gender bending when it comes to characters, is in a perfect world, it should be fine. In a perfect world, that should be the default, is pick the actor who's best for the character. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a culture that still has a lot of racial biases and bad stereotypes and tropes that you have to be cognizant of, whether or not you're playing into those.
Purple has a really good comment here, which is, or did that happen because the casting director had racial bias they were not acknowledging even to themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of what you're starting to get at there.
Yeah,
That we can end up there because it's back there, even if we don't realize that it's
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Or like in a like as an example, like I'd be fine with a black Superman, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
but like say if you wanted to cast Bruce Wayne, Bruce Wayne Batman or Frank Castle the Punisher as a cast a black person as Bruce Wayne Batman or Frank Castle the Punisher, especially in their modern depictions, that gets into yikesy territory. Because
Mm.
on one hand you're talking about someone who's working out his mental trauma by dressing up as a bat and beating up the neurodivergent and the impoverished.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, you've got, a PTSD ridden Marine who's waging an unending self declared war on all criminals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Noodle says, I'm of the opinion I can forgive ignorance that is trying to be better, but not arrogance claiming to be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. No, which is like one of the differences between, you know, Neil Gaiman and the channel punching bag is because, you know, Neil Gaiman has demonstrated that he's on the right side of history. and then the channel punching bag is I was never wrong, blah blah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought when I was
Yeah,
reading Nevermore's comment, which was, yeah,
yeah,
that's why a lot of people, a lot of the I don't see color people ask me if I'm adopted or short circuit when I tell them I'm Mexican.
yeah.
Okay, well, we are about out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover that we did not get to?
um I think I did a fairly good job condensing what is a ridiculously broad topic
Mm-hmm.
into an hour.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. What do you have coming up on your channel that you would like people to know about?
So because of personal thing, personal life stuff happening, um edited videos are probably going to be few and far between if they happen at all. But Media Musings still happens every Sunday morning at 9 Eastern time.
Okay.
This Sunday, we are discussing Superman versus the Elite.
Okay.
And which I'm very excited for because it's basically a counter satire. Like it's a reaction to the people who saw the works of Alan Moore and Frank Miller, the dark satire that was reacting to the Silver Age. It's a reaction against the people who uncritically took that and just ran with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, this next Friday is both the Trans Day of Visibility and my birthday. I might be doing a birthday stream on that. We'll see how I feel.
Okay. Very good.
And then April 2nd,
Mm-hmm.
we're finishing off my birthday pick month with Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, and coming up on this channel next week, I have a very special guest. Vice Rhino will be here. So do not miss next week, April Fool's Day. Vice Rhino is going to be here, and we're just going to talk. I don't even have a specific topic for us to talk about. I just released a video yesterday that is responding to Mama Bear apologetics. And the scripted video that will come out at the end of the week is going to be responding to how to silence an atheist. And it's basically the moral argument, and so that's going to be. I'm sorry, the argument from evil. Sorry,
Yeah.
and so that one's going to be fun as well. I've moved my scripted videos back to a Friday release because when I was doing the Tuesday releases, the numbers of views just dropped dramatically. So I've gone back to releasing them on Fridays.
One last thing, because I like this quote so much that I actually made it my tagline for Media Musings.
Okay.
It's a quote from The Way of Kings by Brian Sanderson. Is the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you what to think, but to give you questions to think on. Too often we forget that. And that just kind of, wraps media literacy up in a, nice little bow.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that does sound like a really good place to end us. So thank you everyone in the chat for coming. Your comments and your questions have been helpful and have really added to the discussion. And thank you so much, Ring. It's been a delightful conversation.
Yep.
Okay. Live your life.